Question number 2. Grant Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance. Does he agree with the Prime Minister's advice to farmers in November of last year that they should not get too worried about the milk price?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, yes. Every farmer's situation is unique, but the Prime Minister was making is that we have a world-class dairy industry that has a very solid track record of resilience and adaptation to changing international market conditions. The member should also be aware, of course, that the trade-weighted New Zealand dollar has fallen 19% in recent months, and this, along with lower interest rates, will help offset the full impact on farmers' incomes from the drop in global dairy prices. Declaring a crisis is the member's preferred approach to every market development, but I can't see how that actually is particularly constructive.
Question, Mr Speaker.
Order. Supplementary question. Grant Robertson.
Was the Prime Minister correct then when he also told farmers in November, 7 months ago, that the dairy price slide would bottom out soon and start climbing again? And what is his definition of soon?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, the dairy price will undoubtedly rise again in the next stage of the cycle. And the member, I think, would be trying to guess exactly when that occurs. There's a number of intersecting international conditions, including, as I pointed out in response to an earlier question, the Greek situation and some of the challenges in the Chinese economy currently. And the thing for New Zealand is you can't control the world economy, but you can control your response. And our response is to operate a conservative, sensible fiscal and monetary policy and continue to encourage the diversification of the New Zealand economy.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
When did he first become aware that there was going to be a global milk glut, and what action did he take in response to that?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I'm tempted to say that it is not the job of the Minister of Finance to soak up a glut in any particular commodity. The member, of course, may think that in his command economy type approach to the world that would be possible. The response of a sensible government is to run a sensible fiscal policy to ensure that the stabilisers are in place to counter any downturn in commodity prices and continue to invest in opportunities to grow and develop the other parts of the New Zealand economy. And that is exactly what this government is doing, and that is exactly what the opposition now appears to be criticising.
Speaker.
Point of order, Grant Robertson.
Mr Speaker, I seek leave of the House to table a report from Goldman Sachs dated June 2014 that indicated there would be a 5-year global milk glut. It's not.
Is it available on the net for members?
It is available on the net, but it is difficult to find, Mr Speaker.
Well,
I doubt many members have read it,
accept the member's word, the honourable member's word. Leave is sought to table that particular document. Is there any objection? There is objection. Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Is he aware that ANZ is now forecasting a dairy payout of $4.50 for next season on top of the $4.40 for this season, and that this would see $13 billion stripped from regional economies over 2 years, representing a real risk to the viability of many farms?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I'm tempted to leap to Mr Robertson and say, well, why don't you just call it a crisis then, because you've been dying to all week. Mr Speaker,
call it a crisis.
Go on, call it a crisis, because that generally helps when the opposition calls something a crisis. Mr Speaker, obviously for the dairy industry, dairy prices are a concern. And I do remind, however, the member there are a lot of other industries that are doing very well. So he speaks of the regions, and the tourism industry is doing absolutely gangbusters at the moment. Then there's the high-tech manufacturing industry, Mr Speaker. Then there is the wine industry, Mr Speaker. Then there is the kiwi fruit industry, Mr Speaker. Then there's the ICT exports industry, Mr Speaker. And then the red meat industry, which is also doing better, Mr Speaker. I appreciate in Mr Robertson's cartoon world, everything is for...
Order. The answer's now going on for far too long.
Speaker.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Isn't it time for him to drop the complacency, stop blaming everybody else, and get real about an economy that's moved from a stumble to a stagger and is built on the volatility of the Auckland housing bubble and a peaking Christchurch rebuild, and actually come up with some action to diversify the economy?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, that's the most pathetic list of platitudes I've heard in many a day in this House from a member whose answers to life are absolutely as shallow as a puddle. Mr. Speaker, his depth of analysis is so shallow, the only thing that could possibly drown in it would be a grasshopper, Mr. Speaker. This government is in fact doing much more of the things that Mr. Robertson would suggest, and again, as I give him an example of the ICT industry, which is growing at the rate of 9.5% per year, and is in fact exports are growing at 14% a year. Now, Mr. Robertson might like to...
Order. Member. Minister will resume his seat. That's enough of an answer. Order. Supplementary question, James Shaw.
When does the Minister of Finance project that dairy prices will recover?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I don't think it is wise for the Minister of Finance to be picking the turn in any commodity cycle, actually, Mr. Speaker. I think the job of the Minister of Finance is to carefully run the country's finances to ensure the automatic stabilisers have an opportunity to operate, as they are in this case, in terms of a lower exchange rate and lower interest rates through the Reserve Bank, Mr. Speaker, and to continue to invest through other ministers in things that help diversify and develop other parts of the New Zealand economy, and continue to do such things through other ministers that help to help New Zealand trade, for example, free trade deals like the Korean FTA, and hopefully for New Zealand soon the TPP. These sorts of things actually improve the opportunities for New Zealand exporters.
You're in the wrong seat, Ron.
Supplementary question, James Shaw.
Given that the Minister of Finance doesn't seem to have any information projecting when dairy prices will recover, why did he tell Radio New Zealand in March that the concentration of capital in dairying wasn't a bad thing? And doesn't this over-allocation of resources into one sector risk destabilising the whole economy as the dairy boom turns to bust?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I think the member is in danger of catching Mr. Robertson's cartoon disease, because the dairy industry represents, depending on how you measure it, between 4 and 5% of the New Zealand economy. So the member may think that is the whole New Zealand economy, but that actually isn't. And again, there's a large number of other industries which are having significant and sustained levels of investment, including kiwi fruit, including wine, including ICT, including high-tech manufacturing, including Apple, and a whole range of those sorts of export industries. So again, if he wants to subscribe to Mr. Robertson's bust scenario, that's fine, but most New Zealanders know we have a very resilient and broad-ranging economy.
Supplementary question, James Shaw.
What specifically is he going to do to support over-leveraged dairy farmers through this bust?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, we'll be doing the sort of things that actually help minimise the risk, which is keeping government expenditure under control to keep interest rates down through the cycle, which is very, very important. We'll also be running a responsible fiscal policy which does not create risk externally in a time of a fragile and not without risk world economy. What a member may be suggesting is something in terms of direct bailouts. I think that would be inappropriate. The New Zealand dairy industry is very resilient. It is one of the most efficient dairy industries in the world, and I'm sure they'll be positioning themselves right now to recover from this lower dairy price and prosper in the next cycle.
Question number 3, Ian McKelvey.
My question is to the Minister